Hi, folks. Welcome to the webinar. It is September 30th, 2015. Like I mentioned, this came out of a meeting that I did on Sunday with some parents of ours in Seattle. And I really talked about it or thought about prior to that meeting, what could I do to create a list, a very digestible list for things that will change our relationships, that will change the way that we connect to each other, the way that we see our children, and the way that we are seen by our children. And I get asked this question a lot whenever I do parent work. Like, we just need some takeaway tools, some program tools that we can walk away with. So I've played around with the list a little bit and I've narrowed it down to 8 that I think are something that you can take with you. You should also remember, any of you, that anytime you want copies of the slides, you can go to the parent portal. And if you don't have access to the parent portal because you've already graduated from the program, you can email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com and you can get whatever information we have. You can get the slides, you can make questions and suggestions and requests. So with that, I'm going to get into tonight. I changed tonight's title, and I'm going to do that one next week, to 8 tools for changing your relationships. And like I said, it comes from the work that I do around families, and I love this quote. George Orwell once observed, "But if thought corrupts language, then language can also corrupt thought." If we follow that logic, we understand that sometimes that what we do changes what we think and feel. I've witnessed families improve their compassion, develop healthier boundaries, and gain great insight into their relationships by utilizing some simple communication tools. So this is really the reverse of the way we often think about it. We often think about it in terms of, I have to have insight, I have to feel something in order to change my behavior. And this is kind of a fake it till you make it, or the idea that what we say, and even the focus that we have to have, the mindfulness that we have to have before we say something, if we're going to use these healthier skills, changes the way that we think and feel. And so, and I've watched it. I've watched families go through the transformation. I find myself, when I'm not using one of these skills, and then when I try to use one of these skills, it's a difficult process to think in an unhealthy way. I have to let down some of my defenses if and when I do that. The first one is I statements. The first tool is an I statement. This is not just the I feel statement. This is also the I think, I believe, I want, and I need. When we can come from a place of talking about ourselves, when we are talking about ourselves, right? But we often talk about others, right? We talk about the truth. We talk about the objective truth. And we think it's more powerful. We think it's unassailable, and it's not. It's absolutely more debatable. And all of us know that people are disagreeing about truths and opinions about the world all over the place. But when we talk about what I feel, think, or believe, or understand, or see, whatever the I is, that is, speaking logically, not assailable. There's no way that we need to be argued, or can be really argued out of that. We can be, we can change our minds, but it's a nonsensical discussion to try to talk somebody out of what they feel or out of what they believe. Other ways of saying that are in my experience or from what I've observed, when I've had a similar, when we talk about it personally. And it really does a couple of things. And there's two very different things that it does. Number one, when we talk in the first person, when we say I feel, I think, and we start talking about my experience, and for me, this is the way that it is, we're making it more personal. It's more vulnerable, right? We like to talk about the collective you out there. We like to talk about, how it is when you have a child who's depressed or a child who's doing drugs. When you have a spouse that doesn't support you, you know how that is. Instead of saying, for me, with a child who's using drugs, or for me, with a spouse that doesn't support me, this is the way that it feels for me. This is what I go through. And that's a very different kind of experience for the person saying it. And oftentimes, a very different kind of experience for the person listening. They're much more able to feel and to connect to that person when they speak honestly, raw, from a place of person, a place of, this is me, this is how I feel and what I'm thinking. So that's the first thing it does. It makes it more personal, more intimate. It requires or asks of us greater vulnerability, for sure. The other thing that it does in a very different way is it's less attacking. And I'm talking about this in the terms, in the context of talking about you statements. You need to do this. You need to stop drinking, right? We think that that's an okay statement. Instead of saying, you know what, you can do what you want, but this is what I'm going to do. Even with our children, we could say, this is how I'm going to respond. If you use drugs, if you fight or yell, this is what I'm going to do. So it's not a passive response, right? People that talk and think like this are really learning to set boundaries, but they're learning to set boundaries out of a place of self-care and identifying what they need in their life, and not from a place of, I need to change you. And even with children, I mean, this has, of course, you can easily apply it to any relationship, but even with children, part of the shift when people say, what's a boundary? I always talk about it's got to start from this place about what you feel comfortable, what you believe, what you value, what's important to you, what feels safe to you. And when we start to talk like that with our children, there is logically no place for a debate. But it's hard for us. We want to think in terms of, I'm doing this for you. It's for your own good. That's what we imagine we're really doing. But if we talk from this place, we're not sending a mixed message to the child, because in many cases, it is really what we feel comfortable with, what we value. And we might not know what their good is. And to have that debate, to have that discussion over the course of a lifetime with a child, it's much more likely that they're going to hold on to resentment, ironically, hold on to their judgments, hold on to the power struggle. But when we talk from a personal place, we take the power struggle out of it. So it's more powerful. It's more real. It's more honest. It shows more integrity. And we get clearer, right? That is the source that we go to when we try to figure out. Every parent that I work with, including myself, struggles with the question, what do I do? Where's my limit? And going back to inside of me, to my center, is one way I've heard people talk about. Finding my center, finding out what's important, finding out what I value. That's the discussion that I often facilitate with parents to help them find out where their boundary is, where their limit is, what the rules are going to be. But again, we think that that might be selfish, or I've got to be all loving to my child all of the time. And so I can't even consider myself. I have to think what's in their best interest. And I think that if we're talking about this idea of finding your authentic center, there is no difference between what's good for them and what's authentic and genuine from a place of love for you. That's why I used to love, I've said this before, I used to love the letters when we had to do them snail mail before the posting on the computer, or even emails were big, because it took a while for you to get a letter. So you would have to write a letter back before you got one. And again, that process then required you, asked of you, to speak from a place of truth, not trying to manipulate or change them. And then vice versa. They felt the same way with parents. Well, I haven't got my letter, or we're a week behind. And I said, so what it's going to ask of you now is that you've just got to be genuine. Just got to speak the truth. You're not going to be selling anything. Tool number 2 is reflective listening. A lot of these are very familiar. I'll get to some less familiar ones in just a moment. Sometimes reflective listening is called deep listening or active listening, and I'll talk about those in just a moment. I'll talk about them now, actually. We refer to it as reflective listening, but I don't care what the title is. Deep listening is a Buddhist idea that is a mindful focus on what the other person is thinking and feeling without any judgment, without any wanting to interpret it, just purely focusing and listening and trying to find the person, trying to understand the person, and not having the angst or anxiety of trying to fix it or control it. That's what I mean by judging it. Like it's broken. That's a judgment. It's crazy. I can't believe you could come to that conclusion or that feeling or that thought. I can't believe you see it that way. We don't have that when we're practicing deep listening or reflective listening. And then active listening, as it's sometimes referred to, is a nice way to remind us that we can be actively listening by reflecting back. It's just reflecting back. And our concentration on the fact, the task that we're going to have to reflect it back, so it's an active process, that focus, that task removes the judgments, right? We can't do very well if we have judgments, or if we have a rebuttal. It removes that. And that's often what's going on for us, right? We're thinking of analyzing it. We're thinking of it as broken or unhealthy, right? We're thinking of our comeback. And of course, the difficult part is sometimes it's a very vulnerable process, because the feeling that is being shared with us, no matter how it's shared, whether it's shared in a nice statement or not, the feeling is sometimes the hurt that the person is feeling, the anger, the frustration, the disappointment, whatever it is directed at us. And that feels very vulnerable to us, right? We want to protect ourselves. We're hurt by that. So we lose our center. We lose connection with the other person. The irony of reflective listening, deep listening, active listening, all really just different ways of describing the same thing. The irony of it is it when we do it, we help others to move through their feelings or for their feelings to move through them. And when we do it, when we practice it, when we make it our practice, it changes us in this way. We start to understand that it's not about us, that what somebody shares is not necessarily about us. It's about them. It can inform us. It can cause us to ask ourselves questions, but it's not necessarily about us. And we don't have to respond to it in that way. We don't have to prove anything, justify anything. We can just hear them. And what will happen over time, it doesn't happen at first because it's hard. It takes sometimes years to practice this and change a culture in a relationship or in a family, is that what people learn in the end is it's nobody else's job but theirs to make themselves happy. It's nobody else's job but yours to make you happy. It's not your child's job. It's not your job to make your child happy. It's your job to love your child, right? It's your job to care for them. It's your job to understand them. It's your job to, we could go down the list of things, but it's not your job to make them happy. That's their job. And when they're not happy, it's not necessarily anyone else's fault. And the powerful way that we learn that when we practice this skill is that we develop an ownership and we don't own other people's stuff. So that's how it changes us. In the Four Agreements, Miguel Ruiz suggests taking things personally is the maximum expression of selfishness, because we make the assumption that everything is about me. Nothing other people do is because of you, he goes on to say. It is because of themselves. And he goes on to give examples of it. If you're interested in that book, it's a very easy read, fascinating read. And one of the agreements is that we take things personally. We have got to break that agreement we have with life, with the universe, with ourselves. And it's great when I see parents practice it and change the way that they relate to their children, change their sensibility, their way of seeing themselves in the world, in their relationship with their child, in their relationship with their child's problems. I see a shift over time where the child starts to own their stuff. And the child actually learns to develop bigger feeling muscles because they're not being dismissed or rescued or talked. They're not trying to be talked out of their feelings in the process. So asking for the intention of the other or stating your intention. So after somebody shares something with me, and again, in these last two skills, it doesn't require that they're sharing it assertively. They can be sharing it passively or indirectly or any way. But after they share something, we ask their intention. What would you like from me? Is there something you're asking for me? How can I support you? What can I do for you? What do you want in this interaction? And this is especially important when they're saying something else that you feel like what they're saying isn't really what they're saying, that there's something else there. You feel some energy, you feel some pull. When parents call their children manipulative, it's really just a confession of your vulnerability to a certain type of child. Yes, there are certain children and people that have greater capacities in that area. But sometimes people that are manipulative to you don't work with me and vice versa, right? There are certain things that pull at me and tug at me. So it really is just a confession. So when we start to feel that pull, that tug, we ask, what are you, let's make this over. Let's name it. What's the request? What do you need? What can I do for you? What's your intention for sharing? And then, like I said, it actually helps them to get clear. But for you, then and you can respond to the request if it's something you're willing and able to do. Or you know what you're being asked and you can say no, right? Making it overt makes it more clear, creates a healthier boundary. Stating your intention is the converse, if you will. It's me, and I use this one. This is one of the ones I actually use quite a bit in my marriage, and even with my older children. I'll say, I'm going to share a feeling with you. You don't have to do anything. I just want you to listen. Can you do that? And the funny thing is, most people will say yes, and then about 40% of the time they still can't do it, right? Because of all those triggers that I listed on the last page when we were talking about reflective listening. But we can go back to that. Happens all the time in my marriage with my wife, back and forth. She'll ask me, sometimes she won't state the intention, but she'll say, can I share something with you? And then I'll start to respond. She said, okay, I got to go back. Can you just listen? I just need you to listen. And this is a stereotype that men, and it's not true that it's men, it can be both men and women, but that they want to fix things. And what's the value of sharing, of venting? And the value is we learn how to feel and we learn how to move through it. And we can get to problem solving, but it's very hard to get to problem solving if we don't feel heard. That's how we get there. So, stating your intention is proactively setting the situation up for success. And then you can go back to it and say, remember, I just wanted you to listen. I've had clients say, parent clients that is, say it's their parents that they practice this with, right? Especially when your child's going through all the stuff that he or she has been going through and your family has been going through. And you call your mom or your brother and you say, hey, can I talk, but can you just listen and not solve it, not give me advice, not try to talk me out of it? Do you have that capacity? And by the way, then people can say, no, I can't. And then you know that they're not the person that's going to be best for you to share with. We begin to line up our meta communication, that is what I really mean, with our syntax, which is the words that I'm using, what I'm saying. Right? We bring those into integrity when we ask for the other person's intention or we state the intention. I love how stating the intention for me up front lets them off the hook, right? When my wife says that to me, first of all, I know something uncomfortable is going to be coming. But second of all, I realize she's not asking for anything else from me. And when I give that to her on the front end and say, hey, I just want you to listen to me, then I get more clear about what I'm really doing. Why am I sharing this? Am I sharing this to try to guilt you? To try to make you feel bad? Am I really asking you for some kind of change? So I get clear. So it helps with our internal boundaries called intrapsychic differentiation. That's the fancy word term for that. Or interpersonal differentiation. Right? It helps with my boundaries inside, me getting clear, and then it helps with my boundaries between me and the other. So asking for or stating your intention. The next one is avoiding imperatives. And you got these instructions when you wrote your impact letter, however long ago that was. And these are some things that I try to do consistently in my life. I give myself an A minus on this skill, and I've had to practice it. And it's funny, when I tell people about this, I ask parents to do this, they don't even know that they're doing it. That's why this last bullet point, sometimes it helps to have a therapist or a parent coach or to use letters to identify them. I'll have parents write a letter and say, now, will you go back and do a find, use your word processor and use the find function and type in all these words one at a time and see if you see them in there. And many times they'll have 5 or 6 or 10 of them in there, but they don't know that they're saying it. It's just so unconscious, unintentional. But here's what they are. Avoid the uses of the words good, bad, right, wrong, evil, and the phrases have to, need to, should, ought to, or must. That's the goal. Find other ways to express what you're trying to express. Typically, you're going back to the I statements, right? Instead of saying hitting people is bad, you say, I'm not okay with you hitting somebody. I don't like it. I don't want you to do it, and I won't allow it in our house. But see, there's a difference in that. There's a difference between saying to your husband, I'm not okay with your drinking. I can't be in this marriage if this is going to happen. Versus, you need to stop drinking. You have a drinking problem. You need to go get help. Right? There's a big difference. One is I'm owning it. Right? I'm not making you bad or wrong. I'm not making me right. I'm not likely to get the defenses put up because I'm not attacking. It's still going to be hard. In those examples I gave, it's still going to be hard. But it is a difference. And for me, most importantly, as the sender of that message, I change my relationship to the person. I change my relationship to the problem. Then it becomes about me, my boundaries, what I need, what's healthy for me, what I want, what I require in my life. And you don't need to do anything. I mean, in the case of a child, there are going to be consequences. Just like if my husband or wife doesn't go get help with their drinking problem, I may leave them. In this case, this scenario, this example. But I'm not going to leave them or threaten to leave them so they'll stop drinking. I'm going to do that because I need that for myself. They can do what they want. Same with our children in some respect. You can make choices. You can get bad grades if you want. You have that capacity. And I have a reaction that I get to have. And because I'm the parent, I have a reaction that's going to infect you. And if you're over 18, it's going to be a different kind of reaction, but it's still going to be a reaction around support or engagement or talking. If you're abusive to me, right? I'm going to set a boundary. And you can still continue to be an abusive person if you want. But you can't do it to me because I won't let you. I'm not going to tell you I won't let you. I'm actually not going to let you. Parents, I hear people say all the time, he can't do that to me. She can't do that to me. My response often is, at least in my head, yeah, she can. Yeah, he can. He actually is. And you're just telling me he can. That doesn't mean anything. That's not a boundary. So, got a little bit off track. Change them to I statements. It'll change how you think. It's much easier to hear. And then practice it with a parent, coach, a therapist, or practice it in letter writing. And you'll find that your statements are much more intentional. Instead of saying you need to stay in school, you need to get good grades, you have to. It's bad if you don't. What you'll change it to is something like this. In my experience, getting good grades and graduating from high school opens a lot of doors. That's what my experience is. I think if you try that, it may very well do the same thing for you. And here's my boundary around it. That's my boundary. And then you state whatever your boundary is around that. But that's a very different way of talking to somebody. And even more importantly, it's a very different way of being in a relationship with somebody. And it feels different. And the culture can change over time between and amongst all of you. The next one is to avoid polarizations. What I'm talking about here is things that are black and white, all or nothing, either or. I'm also including generalizations like always, never, right? You always do this. You're always like this. You're the worst. All right, all of these, there's more than are here. These are just kind of giving you a die. You're the worst, whatever. So when we stick away from these polarizing language, these polarizing things, and we start to replace them with, instead of saying you never listen to me, saying I don't feel listened to you right now. I don't feel listened to right now. Or I'm feeling hurt right now. Not you're always mean, but right now I feel hurt. Right? I'm using two skills actually. I'm using an I statement instead of you statement, and I'm getting rid of the polarizing extreme language, the exaggerated language. A lot of times it's exaggerations in addition to generalizations. And why do we do it? We do it because just to share my feelings feels vulnerable. It's so much more vulnerable to say, I feel hurt by you right now. But if I can add a little offense into it and say, you are such a cruel person. You're the worst. You're always mean. You're never patient, whatever it is, right? Number one, we can easily see that that's a harder thing to hear. But it also puts up a wall of anger, of judgment for me, so I don't have to feel hurt and vulnerable. It's much more vulnerable to say, I feel sad, scared, hurt, embarrassed. Right? I feel those things because in their mind to own. And we want to prove that we're right. We exaggerate, we get extreme because we want to prove we're afraid that if we just tell people how we feel, it's not going to be good enough. And for me, I can often trace it back with a client to their family of origin, right? It wasn't okay. People had to agree that the feelings were valid, right? You just didn't get to feel it. You got talked out of it. You got told how it was wrong or unhealthy or less evolved or immature. And we didn't use them that overtly, but the process was that. We want to correct our children. We were corrected as children. This is not the right way to feel. You're not feeling something real. So then we say, well, I'm going to exaggerate what happened or what I think so that people will have less of an ability to argue. If you're always a jerk, right, to me in a relationship, then of course I'm going to feel hurt. Of course it's going to be hard for me. But if I just say I felt hurt right now, well, am I being a wimp? Can I get over it? Was I not seeing your side of things, right? All of those kinds of discussions can possibly lead to that because we've experienced them in our past and we know that. It can begin to change how you feel. To change from you're always late to I was sad that you were late tonight. I was frustrated that you were late tonight is a very different way of even experiencing my emotions myself. And then, like I said, it has the effect of it's easier on the ear of the person listening. Avoid, be really reluctant to give advice. Now, I know this can be difficult, especially for parents, because parents, rightly so in some ways, assume that it's their job to be the teacher. I'll just say this, we do it too much. We teach, we lecture too much. And we can do it in other ways. I would say be very reluctant to give advice or to teach or to preach or to tell people the way to be very, very, very reluctant. And then shift it from telling them the way it is to sharing a story. When I use the example here of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, or Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous, where the rule, and in most of the meetings, there are some different kinds of meetings, but in most of the meetings, the rule is formally no crosstalk, which means that people don't talk to each other. They get up there and they share their story. right? I'm going to share my experience, strength, and hope with the group. I'm going to tell my story. And in my story, I'm going to tell you what I've learned. And here's the amazing thing about it. People all the time will tell you, talk about, you'll hear, this is why this program works, that they come on those meetings learning, and nobody told them the way that it was. But they come out of there learning something powerful from somebody else's story. It's less threatening for somebody to hear a story than it is for them to have you tell them the way that it is. So, yeah, we can teach. Yeah, we can role model for our children. But if we do it through our story, it's going to be received better. And we're going to get clear about the fact that we don't know your truth, right? We don't. We're all having a difficult enough time trying to find out our truth. And for us to assume we know yours, right? We don't know your truth. Even children, we don't know their truth. They might have different beliefs. They might arrive at different conclusions than us. And that's where I ask the question, what is therapy? I don't experience therapy as telling people what to do. I'll share an idea, a principle, a concept that I believe in, but I'm not telling you what you have. I just got off the phone. I was late to set up the webinar because I was talking to an old friend who's going through a rough time. And I was talking about this idea. He was getting lots of advice from family and friends. And I said, well, what I know about that, what I believe about that, is the very fact that they're giving you advice tells me that you probably ought not to listen to it. Right? It's kind of ironic, but I said it tells me that they don't really know what they're talking about. Because I don't think they know what you should do in this circumstance. I really don't. I don't. The very fact that they're giving you advice tells me that they're missing a level of enlightenment that for me, I wouldn't trust. And so we talked about a lot of things and we shared a lot of things. And there's a certain decisions he has to make in his life. And I was saying, I don't know what you should do. Here's what I know about this question. Here's what I know about this idea, this concept. This is what I know about it. This is my truth. But I don't know what you should do. And by the way, what you should do isn't the solution anyway. It almost never is the solution. It can be a part of executing a solution, but it is not the solution. The solution is this journey that I'm describing on this webinar tonight. That's the solution. Right? Finding a deeper, richer, bigger version of ourselves, transforming. That's the solution. And then the choices that we make arise out of that. And the work that we do arises out of that. And therapy is a place where we go to that can be safe, where people can find us, can tolerate us. Right? And the things that a therapist shares, the wisdom that a therapist shares, again, isn't advice or telling me the way that it is. It's sharing their experience, what they know, what they've observed, what they're hearing me say. And it doesn't have judgment associated with it. It doesn't have that condescending self-righteous feeling that advice does. And in the groups that I run, it's one of my rules I always want to set up, which is we're not going to do advice giving. We're going to share our experiences. You can say, in my experience, when I've had something like this is what I've done that worked for me. Right? And this is how it worked for me. That's okay. But you should do this. You should kick him out. You should let him back in. That's neither the question nor the solution. I use this unfinished business intervention with parents. You've heard me say this sometimes. Let's say your child is struggling in our program or somewhere else with peer pressure. Right? Your inclination is to give them the lecture about it only matters what you think about yourself and what other people think about, all that kind of stuff. But instead of that, share with them where you still struggle with peer pressure. Because all of us do sometimes. We worry about what people think about us. And then share with them, give an example if you can. You know what? I heard you had this situation. I can relate to it in this way. Sometimes I worry what people think about our family. Sometimes the clothes I worry about what people think about the way my body looks. Sometimes I worry about at work, some people will judge me by the car I drive, by the house I have, by whatever. So when we start doing that, the most amazing thing happens. Your child gives you a lecture on peer pressure. Well, or they just feel understood and heard, and then they start to talk about it. But often they'll say exactly what you were going to say in the lecture, because when you empathize with them, when you aren't the person that knows, right? You're embracing not knowing, the wisdom of not knowing, I call it. Then your child feels safe, and then they can begin to access their resources. But if they think that they're being judged by you, like you're unhealthy, you're immature, you're sick, this is pathological, this is a problem, you need to fix it, then it's likely to trigger a defense, and then they're not going to be able to look at themselves. They're not going to be able to claim those resources, and there's going to be this stuckness between the two of you. So the unfinished business intervention is, I think, powerful. And by the way, I think it could be adopted a lot more by a lot of us in a lot of relationships. Avoid lecturing, teaching, preaching, and repetition. Just avoid them. Be reluctant. When somebody asks me for advice, I almost never give it. In fact, at the end of this phone call that I was describing, the person said to me, "Thank you for the, I know you don't call it advice," he said to me, "but thank you for the talk." And so part of the idea is we can have a discussion around things, but we can do it with respect, with compassion, with understanding, and without knowing it and triggering the defense that the other person is less than. So be reluctant to do these things. And of course, the Dalai Lama said this: to be aware of a single shortcoming within oneself is more useful than to be aware of 1,000 in somebody else. That is so true for all of us, even for us parents. The seventh tool is compassion. This is where we have a dear one attitude toward ourselves and others, both. That is, if there's a limitation in us, if we have a certain kind of diagnosis, depression, behavior, symptom, that we don't dislike it, we don't beat ourselves up for it, we look at it and we say, I'm here for you. We almost think of that thing in us that we're struggling with as a young child. And we hold it in the same way we would as a young child. We say to ourselves, this is a kind of a mantra, a mindfulness thing: dear one, depression, dear one, anxiety, I'm here for you. I care for you. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to pay attention to you. I'm going to help you. Not, oh my gosh, I hate this piece of me. I hate this part of me. I hate when I do that, right? That kind of duality does not lead to change, to healing, to growth, to all the things that we want it to do. It doesn't work. We can't chase away woundedness. That should say woundedness. I didn't edit these slides. We can't chase away our woundedness, which is what our symptoms are. Our symptoms are the voice of our wounds. And we can't chase those away with hate, anger, or disgust. We think we can. And we think we can because we learned that in our childhood. We learned that when we did things that were wrong, that were not acceptable, that could not be tolerated, that we got a reaction from people that they were very upset with us, very frustrated, very sad, very scared even, very anxious, sometimes just plain old disgusted with us. And so what we learned is we learned to try to hide those things in many cases, to bury those things. And what we missed was an understanding of ourselves, a deeper understanding of ourselves. And then those things that we bury, those authentic parts of ourselves that could have, if they would have been embraced and held with gentleness, that could have taught us something about ourselves, they end up cropping up in our lives as symptoms and addictions and mental health problems. Then we go to therapy, and the therapist helps find the wounds again and helps find the hurt and the sadness and the fear and the scared and the insecurity. All of that hurt, that broken stuff, I mean broken in the terms of it was broken when we were young. And that's what we're doing. So this is kind of the opposite of it, is if we can hold the other person. So when your child comes and talks about the symptoms, that you manage your reaction, that you have it, and maybe you share it with a therapist or somebody else, but that you own it. And that you look at them with a dear one. And it's hard to, because the response that many of their behaviors elicits in us is the exact opposite that is required from us to contribute to healing. I'm going to say that again. The response that our children's behaviors, the symptoms that they're sent here for, elicit in us is the exact opposite that is required from us to provide to them that helps toward healing. So I know that. That's the work. That's the work we have to do. And again, compassion is incomplete unless we have it for ourselves too. And even that we have compassion about our inability to do this, right? If we don't have compassion for how hard this is, then we're not going to get there. And if we don't have compassion for ourselves, we're going to have a hard time being there for others, connecting to others, and holding it for them too. So it's all the same thing. It's all the same work. The last one is timeout. And timeout is not the timeout you give to a child. That's also a fine intervention, fine tool. and behavioral management. But timeout is the timeout I'm talking about where I take one myself. It's the stuff that we teach in anger management training and conflict resolution training. That if I am upregulated, anxious, or agitated, threatened, hurt at a high level, I'm going to lose access to the most important part of problem solving, the frontal lobe, because all of those feelings trigger the flight fight response, or freeze. Sometimes it's called fight, flight, or freeze response, which is a survival, which is the lower part of the brain, the limbic system, the reptilian brain, the primitive brain, where I'm just trying to survive because I'm feeling threatened. And if I operate from that place, I'm not going to make the kind of connections that I'm describing here. So I'm learning, this is me talking now, I'm learning to get better at timeouts. I'm learning to do it better than I was when I was younger, to take some time. And you'll know and you find that we almost always do better when we're down regulated. And sometimes you have to take multiple timeouts in a situation. Why don't people do it? Because it's too late. Because people don't want to do it when they're kind of bothered, right? It feels vulnerable to do it. And if I take a timeout when I'm just agitated, when I'm getting agitated, I feel like I'm weak. Like, shouldn't I have more capacity? I don't need a timeout. I'm stronger than this. I can hold on to it. I can repress it. I can manage it. So it's vulnerable to own my capacity is lacking in this area. My bandwidth is being challenged. What I can do. I'm losing my dear one attitude. And I've got to go recharge so I can come back with it because right now I don't have it. And it's about me, not about you. You're just you. My lack of bandwidth, my lack of capacity, that's me. And we don't want to own that. We want to make it about them. You're being such a jerk, such a whatever, that of course, any reasonable person, which I am, of course, would react this way. So it's vulnerable. We do it too late. And then by the time that we know we need a timeout, when we start doing and saying things we know are not healthy, we don't even care about skills and tools and communication anymore. We're not likely to use them. So we don't do it. I think of it as a scale from 1 to 10. If the most serious rage is number 10, and the calmest, most groundedness is number 0, it starts at 0. When we get up in that 8, 9, and 10 range, none of us are any good. When I'm in an 8, 9, and 10, full of rage, all this stuff I'm talking about goes out the window. And when I'm at a 1 and a 2, I might not need a timeout. But right when I start to recognize that I get in that 3, 4, 5, 6 range, right in that range, that's when I need to figure out how I can take care of myself so I can still have compassion toward myself and toward you and be the kind, loving person that I aspire to be. So I've got to take that time out around 5 or 6. I've learned this recently, that when I think my wife needs a timeout, I need a timeout. Sometimes when I think my kid needs a timeout, I need a timeout. Because what I'm saying is, hey, you need a timeout. But what I'm saying is, I'm getting to the point that I might not respond well to what's going on right now. So I need a timeout. And it's weird to shift it that way. For so many years, I kept being clear about everybody else's need for a timeout. But now I'm getting clear that oftentimes when I have that thought, I'm the one who needs it. Like I described earlier, our agitation, and I'm using that word generally because it could be anxiety, it could be fear, it could be anger, could be agitation, whatever it is. The higher it gets, the more intense it gets. The more it compromises our capacity to be rational, loving, kind, patient, all of those things. We lose access to the rational parts of our brain, and we get into the fight or flight or freeze response. So that's what that does for us. So here are the take-home messages. I think I gave this quote before. Richard Dreikers said it this way: the proper way of training children is identical with the proper way of treating fellow human beings. He's a child psychologist that worked with Alfred Adler, some of you may know of. And that's why when people tell me I have a 28-year-old kid, it's not the same as with a 7, it's so much the same. There are different choices to make, but the core is the same. That's why people who come through Evoke will say to me in the process or years later, it changed my relationship at work, with my peers, with my siblings, with my parents, with my children, of course, with everybody. And that's why you can walk into an Al-Anon meeting and somebody sitting next to you is talking about their alcoholic spouse. And yeah, that's a different situation. But there are core themes and principles that he or she is talking about that apply to you. And when we have the capacity to see the similarity between parenting a child who's cutting and depressed or computer addicted to a child who's a drug addict and violent and aggressive, to a wife who has an alcoholism issue, to a parent who's anxious and depressed, when we can start to see the themes that run through all of that, we are seeing ourselves. We're understanding what this work is all about. That's when I know people get it. And it happens in the groups out in our field area all the time. Somebody will be sitting next to a drug addict and say, I don't use drugs, but anger is my addiction. And that drug addict is saying to the other person, you know what? I didn't have that problem at home. I was always an extrovert. I didn't hide away in my room. But I'll tell you how I did hide when I was out in public. I'll tell you the mask I did wear. Seeing differences between ourselves and others is not a sign of mental health. Seeing similarities, empathy, connection, understanding, resonating, even with people that we have strong reactions to, is evidence of mental health. The above tools that we described today are about changing our sensibility. It is the lifelong project of changing the way we are in the world. From the book that I wrote, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, I described the transformation as changing the question from what do I do to these series of questions to be answered in this order. Who am I? Who is my child? And what is my relationship to their problems? So that's the difference. That's the sustaining source that we go to in parenting, in relationships, in marriage, in partnering, in civilization. Those are the sources that we go to. Those are the questions. And when we don't know what to do, there's a reason. We've lost connection with these three questions in this order. And this is where I want to end. This is the way that I think about it. So think of this fist as your natural inclination, the way you responded to something yesterday, right? Your inclination or your pattern, the way you respond to a situation, to a relationship. And then think of this fist as the ideal. Can I imagine when somebody says or does something to me, can I imagine what it would be like to approach them with groundedness, authenticity, honestly, assertiveness, love, compassion, all of those things? And sometimes we can't do that. Sometimes we need help. That's where a therapist can say, here's what it might look like. So there's the natural inclination and the ideal. And then the space in between, that's your work. That's therapy. And I'm better now, much better than I was when I was younger. And part of my training has given this to me. Part of my experiences, I can oftentimes identify the ideal. Sometimes in myself I can't. That's why I go to therapy. Sometimes it's too scary because when I know that there's this ideal that I can't do, that is too painful for me to do, too scary, too vulnerable for me to do. I don't even want to think about it. Don't even want to know it because I know the pain that's going to be required of me to get there, the vulnerability that's going to be required, the feeling of the hurt or whatever it is. But that's the thing. What you do, the ideal, and the work in between. And that's where therapy can help, parent coaching can help, a mentor, a sponsor can help. And that's the task. So, all right, I'm happy to take live topic related questions and then we'll go on to other questions afterward. How do you come back from a timeout in the most effective way? That's a great question because sometimes timeouts can be used to threaten the other person, to abuse the other person, to disconnect from the other person. And ideally you come back from it talking about what you learned, what you own, what's going on for you. And usually that's the more vulnerable stuff. Like I was taking a time out because when we were talking earlier, I was feeling attacked. I thought you thought I was a bad person. I started to feel triggered. I started to want to defend myself. And what I was really feeling was vulnerable. If you're not ready to do that, you might not be ready to come back yet. And some of you might say, well, gosh, I'm not ready to do that a lot of the time. But that's the work. That's the ideal. It does ask of us to look inside of ourselves, to be vulnerable, to be authentic, and to be honest. And that's a lot to ask of a human being. But that's what it's asking of us. If that's not what happens, at least you come back without the inclination or the mistake to rage or hurt the other person. At least you come back with that. At least you come back with a better chance of not being abusive to that other person emotionally, physically, whatever. All right, I will get back. I'll do a couple announcements and we'll do some more questions. Here are the 12-step groups that we would like all of you to go to 6 times while your child is with us. Don't wait until afterwards. Start early. 6 times. We just want you to try it out. We think 6 times. They talk about it in these meetings. 6 times is a way to try it out. Please follow us on social media so you can be updated about the new blogs that come out, the new meetings that come out, new activities, inspirational quotes and pictures from staff and from our field area. So follow us there on those. Here's the book. You can get it on Amazon or you can get it You can listen to an audio copy of it. You can order that on Amazon or through Audible, or also buy a CD. If you buy any of these books, any books through the Parent Alumni Foundation book page, then a portion of the proceeds go to our charity that helps people that can't afford treatment get it. We've already put a few kids through the program and aftercare this year from this charity organization. If you want to find out more, you can email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. Here are some of the upcoming meetings. I'll try to add some more as we go. This is from last week, so I apologize. The Seattle one's still up there. I didn't change this slide. I was running late tonight. But we'll be in New York. September 27th just happened, so October 25th is the next time. We have a new facilitator, and people were raving about how great the session went for him this last weekend. We have these upcoming workshops. The Entrada Parent Workshop. We would like all parents, if they have the resources, to go to this at one time during the program. That's our goal. That's our hope for all of you. They're fantastic. It's education, some field experience, some role playing, some processes, staff, and run by Dr. Paul Goddard. There's the email there. And then the intensive is coming up on October 8th or 11th. This particular one, the Finding You one, is for, it doesn't have to be about parenting. So we have parent ones, family ones. This one is just individuals. That this one will have some adults, some parents, some people that haven't been through the program, some young adults. So this one is for anybody. And then we have our pursuits trips for high adventure. This can be for families and also for young adults. You can go to our website to look at more there. All right, live questions. Any other questions on anything, Stephanie, before I wrap up? We just came off a call where our son has chosen his aftercare and it was very stressful. Any advice for us? Is this normal? Um, so he chose his aftercare. It was, I think, what would I say? I mean, yeah, it's normal. Of course, it's normal. Whatever you're feeling is okay and normal. And so find somebody to talk to that can understand, and that's not a lot of people, right? But hopefully, and I'm glad even though it's just a posting on a question here, I'm glad you tell me because it's okay, and it's okay to be stressed out, and our children don't need our stress, right? They don't need. They're dealing with enough stress themselves. But it's scary. And this new way of trying to be and trying to be with somebody that we love so much and we're trying to help and is doing self-destructive things. It's hard. We don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to be part of the problem, right? We don't want to be those things. And so we worry a lot and we get stressed out and we worry that he's going to make the decision that we think is going to be more harmful or not as ideal, right? We worry about that. And we walk on eggshells and we try to control it. That's really what I'm describing leads to is we try to control it, right? We try to push all the right buttons. We own stuff that's not ours and we don't own the stuff that is ours. That's the irony, right? We own their decision and we don't own our reaction. Sometimes you are here, but we don't sometimes. And our own anxiety, our own baggage, our own stuff. So, but yeah, it's normal. It's okay. Folks, this is a long book, a very, very long book. And no matter where you're at in the process, you're not close to the end. And I think if we shift our perspective, which is going to be the next webinar, if we shift our perspective some, I think we will be less anxious, less agitated, and we'll be a better parent when we're that. So feel it, own it, talk to somebody else about it, figure out ways to cope with it, figure out ways to be authentic in the face of it, figure out ways not to control it, do all of that stuff, and then don't put it on your child. And then you can be more authentic and present and assertive in relationship in the presence of him. You can be more present actually in the relationship with him, and then you can give him back his stuff. Will you come to North Carolina in the future? Uh, I don't know if I'll come to North Carolina. I'll consider it. Um, I will come back in the southeast for sure. I'll make a southeast trip. In fact, I'll make a southeast trip sometime December, January, sometime in that range this year. I don't know how close I'll be to North Carolina. It might be Atlanta. That might be I know that's a couple of hours from the border of North Carolina to Atlanta. And also, I said this, and I have a couple of requests. Um, one is for Houston, which I'm working on, and I've said this: if something that can help me do this. If you have not just a parent meeting, but if you have an event. I'm speaking at my old high school in Irvine, California. Well, actually, it's half of my old high school. They split, but I'm speaking at a high school where I grew up. Um, um, this in next month, and in November, I should say, and that allows me to do other travel. So, because I'm speaking at the event, so if you have a PTA, a church group, a large parent gathering of non-evoked parents that you have some connection to that I can speak to, then I can do that, and then at the same time schedule a parent support group on the next night or the day before, something like that. So that is something that I would definitely entertain. That gives me two reasons to go to a place and helps me to go to a place. So that's helpful. But I don't know if we have a strong enough base in North Carolina specifically for me to go there for that. So it might be somewhere down there. I'll give you as much time as I can, lead time. Our son did well at Evoke and finished the program in 7 weeks. He went to Africa and seemed to be doing very well. During our first visit after 2 months, he talked about how he did not need to be there and he was frustrated. He seems to have really regressed. Is that normal part of the process? Any thoughts on we should handle it? That that sounds like a slide that I wrote, and I'm not kidding you. It's so normal. It's so cookie cutter normal. In fact, if you look at the slide on transition or the one on regression, I give that example exactly. I like to point people to that because when it happens, then you're ready for it. Yes, he has regressed. But let me explain this to you. Evoke was a small box, folks. We're a very, very small box. And many clients and students have a great deal of success and get really stabilized and get a lot out of it. But then the box gets bigger and it's harder. Aftercare is harder. Home is the hardest. The bigger the box, the harder it is. The more temptations, the more pressures, the more relationship challenges, right? The less support. That's the irony of all of this is Evoke is the most supportive, even though it's the tightest box, it's the most supportive. So my response is it's totally normal. Expect it, breathe through it, learn how to adjust to the bigger box, even for you. Learn how to respond to him while he's struggling in this box, this bigger box that he's in, because it's going to happen at home. So as we keep expanding the box, you keep having these kinds of challenges. And regression, sometimes it's not regression. The analogy that I use, and sorry if you've heard it many times, but if you're juggling three balls, I can juggle three balls, and then I can't juggle four. So if you handed me the fourth ball, I would drop it. And it would take a long time for me to learn how to juggle four balls, right? Did I regress in my juggling ability? No, I just got handed another ball. Did your son regress? We could call it that, but he has more balls. He has more school, and more peers that he's around, staff that shift out more contact with you, more freedom, right? Those are more balls. And so he's dropped them. But he didn't forget how to learn how to juggle. It's just hard to access and he's going to need to develop some new skills. Be patient. Replace your anxiety with curiosity. That's the ninth tip. Replace your anxiety about your children with curiosity, and it'll be a wonderful contribution for all of you. My son very much likes several books he has read while in the field. He's scheduled to come home soon, and I'm wondering if you have a list of books specifically for the adolescents on your website you recommend to continue to lead them on the journey. I'm not sure that we have the full list on the website, but uh, you know what I'll do? Here's what I'll do. Go to the parent. I'm going to go out of this and then come back, Stephanie, so you can bring me back. Go to this website thing at the bottom. You can copy that down or cut that or take a picture of it or something. I'll leave it up there for a minute. Go to the Parent Alumni Foundation page, and there are 10 different categories. And I'm going to make sure that they have categories. I don't know if they do, because this one I'm pausing on. I don't know if they have categories for adolescents and young adults that we recommend to them to read. They might be spread throughout all, but I'm going to take a look at that. If we don't have those, I'm going to add those. Okay? So I'll have them add those if we don't have those on that page. But that's a place to go to for now, and then I'll find out. And then, of course, your son can tell you the list of books that he's read, I'm sure. And we kind of do it, Man's Search for Meaning is one of the books that we ask all the students to read. The Knight in Rusty Armor is another one. And then there's about I don't know, 8 or 10 that are very, very common. And then beyond that 10 or 12 I just mentioned, there's 50 that various therapists use with various clients who have various issues. So that's kind of what we're up against there. But I'll make sure that there is one for former students, for students. Um, one of the sections, one of the topics, and go just kind of peruse through and click through all of those. All right, Stephanie. All right, folks. Next webinar is the one that I was supposed to do tonight, which is perspectives and expectations, but I wanted to do this one tonight. That'll be Tuesday, October 6th at 6:30 p.m. So look forward to talking to you then. I hope this is a nice point of contact, helpful point of contact with you. Have a great week, and I will talk to you next Tuesday. Bye bye.